Well, hey there, we're back, and this is The Weekly Grind, a podcast where we work out the topics that shape and influence the culture, community, and church of today from a biblical perspective. My name is Ben, here with my pastor and good friend Chip. He's the lead pastor, and I'm the worship pastor here at the Napoleon Church of the Nazarene. Today on the podcast, we break down some of the hot topics facing our culture today and do our best in bringing kingdom perspective to this conversation. How did Jesus speak out against injustices? What does Scripture say about unity? What does Scripture say about division? This is The Weekly Grind. Well, hey, we are rolling again. Welcome back.
I tell you what, I'm excited, man. It's been different, different format, necessary format. I felt good about what we did, but to be in this setting with me and you having conversation over
kingdom
content,
perspective.
Yes, it's good to be back.
Back to what we're doing. You have good Father's Day?
I did, man.
Shooting this the day after Father's Day.
Yeah.
So
it's fun.
I had to bring a little bit of personal touch to our set because you got kind of your teams going on, and so
that is so good.
My only gift from Chris, I just said, hey, just give me some artwork from the kids, and of course, my daughter's like 8 weeks old, and Judah's 20 or 21 months old, so he scribbled a little bit for me and.
You know what? This is the first podcast since you become a 2-time father.
That's right. Lots happened over the last couple of months.
COVID, protests, marriage.
Babies. Yeah.
All over. I mean, wow.
Yeah. It's hard to believe, but we're back, and, as we're kind of joking about it, hopefully old habits died from the old norm, but hopefully the good habits continue, and I think for us, this is a good rhythm and a good habit for us.
We really draw energy from knowing that we are doing our best to push the kingdom perspective.
Yeah.
Right?
And
so this is an avenue for us to try to do that. And we hope that you guys interact with this, engage with this, think about maybe what we're bringing up, and just allow the Lord to continue to refine how you see the world. Yeah. In the context of being a kingdom citizen. Yeah. Right? So
bringing kingdom perspective to the things that engage our culture today. And boy, there's a lot of things in our culture today that could use some kingdom perspective. And I pray that we can shed some light on that and do our part. Right? I mean, you look at the life of Jesus and the way he modeled, he transformed the entire world. And he didn't do it with a megaphone. Right. The man was meek. He was humble. And we and even the last couple of weeks of you teaching and sharing on meekness and humility, it's not being timid or shy or whatever. And we'll get into some of that stuff in the next couple of podcasts, but there's power in that and actually great restraint.
I agree. Which is not happening in our present contemporary context.
Exactly.
Everybody's shouting. And it can seem like we're just another attempt here, and we're one of a million voices or millions of voices. We're not trying to necessarily just shout a viewpoint. We are wanting to have a conversation that we hope helps people think about what do the Scriptures teach about what's going on in my world. How do I, like I've been talking about in our sermon series, how do I live in the world yet not draw my values from it, but also realize that what Christ was about is what the world needs most. And so I'm sent back into the world to
and we have truth and we have love, right? And and we know that the heart is deceptive. And we have a culture and a world that leads on emotion, that leans on feeling. And being rooted in Scripture is more important now than it ever has been. Being rooted in truth and then speaking truth in love.
That's right.
Is hopeful as our approach.
Absolutely. Engage the mind, because out of your mindset, then your behaviors begin to follow. Yeah. So can I get my mind right? Yeah. If I get my mind right, then my behavior, my actions, my interactions with people will begin to follow in a Christ-like way. And I realize that's a work of a lifetime. Yeah. God's gracious. He's patient with us. But he's always drawn us to a maturity that mirrors the life of Christ.
Yeah.
And
and seeing ourselves as in the world, but not of it. And that's where, the last couple of weeks, our sermon series has been geared around.
Right.
And living in Ephesians, namely Ephesians 2. And so kind of to start off, you okay if I just
Absolutely.
read a little bit?
Sure.
Okay. You're gonna start off Ephesians 2, verse 11. It says, "Therefore, remember that formerly you who were Gentiles by birth and called uncircumcised by those who call themselves the circumcised, which is done in the body by human hands, remember that at that time you were separate from Christ, excluded from citizenship in Israel and foreigners, to the covenants of the promise, without hope and without God in the world. But now, in Christ Jesus, you who were once far away have been brought near by the blood of Christ. For he himself is our peace, who has made the two groups, the Jews and Gentiles, and has destroyed the barrier, the dividing wall of hostility, by setting aside in his flesh the law, that its commands and regulations. His purpose was to create in himself one new humanity out of the two, thus making peace, and in one body to reconcile both to them, of them to God through the cross, by which he put to death their hostility. He came and he preached peace to you who were far away and peace to those who were near. For through him we both have access to the Father by one Spirit. Consequently, you are no longer foreigners and strangers, but fellow citizens with God's people and also members of his household, built on the foundation of the apostles and the prophets, with Christ Jesus himself as the chief cornerstone.
Sideline, I've always said that, I don't know if I've told you this, but if I could name a church, like brand a church.
Oh, yeah.
Have I ever told you that?
Cornerstone.
Cornerstone. I just love that.
Yeah.
I think it epitomizes what this is about, who Jesus was. Mm-hmm. Again, what's going on right now in the national conversation is so relevant to what Paul was writing about 2,000 years ago.
Yeah.
How do I navigate through this world with a kingdom perspective? Ephesians chapter 2 goes a long way in helping us understand how we're supposed to see ourselves, mm-hmm. and out of that, how we treat others, how we live with others, how we're mindful of what happens to us without Jesus Christ. Mm. And the only hope we have is this one who breaks down the walls of hostility through his work on the cross, the salvation that he offers. Mm-hmm. And so I just am always amazed that God is always so relevant. The word is always so relevant to every situation, every generation, every context, whether it be 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, or now. The truth is unchanging. It is life-giving every time.
Yeah.
And so thinking through all of this narrative about race, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What's a kingdom perspective to that?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, even Solomon reminds us there's nothing new under the sun. And one thing that's not new is the human heart and the invasion that sin has on it, and the spiritual battles that the enemy is seeking to destroy all unity. The enemy's purpose is to destroy any sort of unity.
So I think this, again, brings us back to the reality that what we naturally do as sinful people, fallen, is we create prejudice. Mm-hmm. And we build walls, and we put together social constructs. Because a part of the sinful condition at the heart of it is pride.
Yeah, the desire to get ahead, to be better.
To feel valuable. And in a sinful, fallen world, the way I feel valuable is if I am ahead of you, or I am superior to you. Mm-hmm. And so what has happened down through the history of mankind, really, is we have built these constructs that God never intended. Mm-hmm. And we see this primarily with the Jewish people. The conversation here is Jew-Gentile, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. I shared this in a sermon. Race wasn't something that is ever even really mentioned in the scriptures. Mm-hmm. The only distinction between peoples was the Jewish people and the rest of the world, because God needed a vehicle in which to present who he was and then bring Jesus into the world. Mm-hmm. And so he chose the Jewish people to do that. Yeah. And what happened with that, so there was no race. Like, I'm really been like trying to eliminate the idea of saying race.
There's one human race.
There's a human race. That's important.
Yeah.
The Bible doesn't even say, hey, the Chinese race or the Caucasian white race or the black race or the Spanish. It doesn't do that, because God always has created the world with one race.
Race is a social construct, not a biblical concept.
It's not. The only thing, the distinction that we see is Jew and Gentile. And that's at the heart of this conversation. But it's important for us to understand this, to understand why we end up creating all this prejudice in our world. Mm-hmm. Because look at the Jewish people. God called them out to proclaim himself. Yeah. He asked them to do a lot of weird things, to live a lot differently, to have this unique and other lifestyle. And God did that on purpose. A lot of what he called them to do with dietary laws, hygienic things, ceremonial things, Jesus came along and said, listen, I'm putting that aside. That wasn't forever. Mm-hmm. That's not, God was specific time and purpose so that the rest of the world would say, what is it about them? And he's drawing attention to himself. And that all culminates in Jesus Christ. Yeah. What the Jewish people did is what we do as sinful people. They were given a specific assignment to carry God's truth, proclaim God's message, and they couldn't handle it.
And they made it about themselves.
That's it. And that's what we do. We create prejudices. The sinful heart does that. Mm-hmm. And so if you understand that even God's vehicle, his special assignment people couldn't handle it and created prejudice, then we understand that our world, fallen, is going to do this.
So let's do some. We had a poll a couple weeks ago. Some of the examples of prejudice that were listed. Now you mentioned race or ethnicity, as being one of them.
I think that as I've listened to the ethnicity, right, the African American narrative that's out there. Don't get me wrong. Our context where we live, where we've grown up, who we're citizens of, has sinned greatly in this area. I mean, slavery was just wrong. Segregation was just wrong. Mm-hmm. And we're called to push back against that, to not be a part of that. But as I thought about prejudice, I realized that it goes much deeper than just ethnicity, color of skin. Mm-hmm. That prejudice rises up all over the place. I thought about that too, because the context that we live in, Ben, is very, very much white. Mm-hmm. And so are we saying that because we live in a county that's very much white, prejudice doesn't exist?
Absolutely not.
No. It can manifest it still in ethnicity, right? But it also manifests itself in social standing. The who's who, the who's in, who's out, who's cool, who's not. Some of this sounds like junior high over again, but it doesn't leave us. Or economic status. Yeah. Rich and poor. Yeah. And how we treat people from those different classes.
Yeah. Yep.
It's amazing in our poll. of our own people.
Yeah.
Those were the number 1 and 2 issues. So prejudice is a heart condition that rises up always and continually, and we need to see what Christ does about that and what is the kingdom perspective. And basically this passage, along with corresponding scriptures all through the New Testament, is Christ just demolishes any kind of prejudice. And I think if we can grab a hold of that as a kingdom person, as we are navigating through the conversation about, they're calling it race, I would call it ethnicity, right? Because I think there's one human race. And why that's important to see us as one human race is there are no more silos.
Right.
Like if you think from God's perspective, he didn't create this race, this race, this race. He created one. Mm-hmm. So everybody's the same in essence. We're equal, definitely equal. Yeah. We're the same. We just manifest a little bit different in some of our characteristics. One which is skin color.
Yeah.
That's a very, very minute part of who we are as a complete person.
Yeah.
My heart looks the same as someone who has a different skin color. My blood bleeds out the same. Everything about my mind is similar, right?
Yeah.
Just the skin color is a very, very small part. We're the same. Mm-hmm. And that's the way God created us. And I think it's important, like, to stop talking about the race. Mm-hmm. One human race with different ethnicities.
Yeah.
I think that's a great part to start, a great place to start, because we begin to realize I can't fall into the trap of the social constructs that the world's always created.
Right.
For its own benefit, for a certain group of people. So then they create this idea that this ethnicity is not as valuable, so they can be held in slavery. Mm-hmm. Like, those things have been for years and years. And it was a flawed perspective. And we're called to bring Christ's kingdom into this world. He breaks it all down.
Yeah. I mean, the kingdom culture supersedes any other culture. And the thing is, like, the life of Christ, the principles that it's the antidote to all of these things. So if you whether it's prejudice, whether it's hating a brother, or whether it's lust, or whether it is, it's getting on your knees. It's praying. It's praying for that other person. If you're in an argument with them, it's just amazing when you start to pray for somebody that you are frustrated with or that you disagree with. What happens to your own spirit,
your heart,
in your heart? Mm-hmm. And I think that so much of this, I mean, and I think if you're an unbeliever, I mean, prayer sounds cliche, right? That's kind of where it's at now. But for the believer, it is the greater work. And the reason that it is the greater work is because it deals directly with our intent, our heart, our condition. And once we're changed, then then Christ gives us eyes to see, to have empathy towards you and towards this other person. And then at that point, it truly is kingdom perspective. It's no longer the worldly things, the physical makeup that that hold us back sometimes or separate us.
Yeah, and I like how he writes here that what Christ did on his work is the culmination of God's plan in the world. And his plan in the world, he uses this idea, he uses the word a new humanity. Well, the idea is the world has created this system, and the kingdom of Christ comes, and it is of a nature that just demolishes, is the antithesis of all of these structures that the world has created. And at the heart of that is Christ is about absolutely zero prejudice. Remember what it's all through the New Testament. There's not Jew or Gentile, free or slave, male or female.
Yeah.
I mean, he's just demolishing, because you have to understand that up until that point, the male and female thing, the inequality of male to female, it was just awful, wrong. Christ comes along, and in his kingdom, everybody is valued. Everybody is the same. There is no rich and poor. I love how James just absolutely goes after, you cannot treat a rich brother differently than you can a poor brother. It's why Christ, part of his kingdom is we use these little phrases. The first shall be
last,
and the last shall be
first.
Why? There are no places of honor in the kingdom. It's all of us, equal brothers and sisters, joint heirs with Christ in the kingdom. And if we can hold fast to that mindset, then we begin to navigate through the prejudices that exist. First of all, race.
Yeah.
You and I, we talked through this, but 2018, not a poll from 2 weeks ago, and kind of in a period of peace, so to speak, on this race issue.
Yeah.
This, the 97% in our country believe that racism still exists. Some felt more strong about it than others, but 97 out of 100 people would say, I still believe there is some racism in our country, that's an extremely high position, and it would lend itself to say, hey, they've observed it. They've seen it. I've listened to the stories of friends and people, acquaintances that would share certain things. And so prejudice in the realm of ethnicity, right? I'm not saying race on purpose, because there's one human race. I need to keep always acknowledging that. I'm not going to silo myself away from my African brothers or my Chinese brothers or my Hispanic brothers, because there is no difference between
anti-gospel
us. That is. Our ethnicities are different, but there's one human race. But what it's saying is there is prejudice that exists.
Yeah.
And as a kingdom person, one of the main things that we highlighted in the sermon was it calls us to not only be a non-prejudice person.
Right. But to be anti-prejudice.
But to speak out against it.
Yeah.
Where I can. Maybe that does look like, for me, if I'm in the right context and setting, I'm willing to walk down a street in solidarity with my brothers of different ethnicities. If that's, I would be willing to do that, right? But it also is at the barbecue,
right,
with my buddies on Friday night, when somebody makes a jaded comment, a prejudiced comment about a different ethnicity or a different social class or a different economic, to say, yeah, I just don't think that's the kingdom, man. Don't fall into that. And we're called to not just be non-prejudice, but anti-prejudice. I think that's what Christ did. And like you said earlier, he didn't do it in a bullhorn kind of bombastic way.
I mean, you go back to Jesus riding into Jerusalem the week he was crucified. They crucified him because they thought that they were going to overthrow the Roman government. They were so disappointed that that's not how.
Right. But what did he come in on?
Yeah, a donkey.
Humble, meek.
Yeah.
Because his way, his approach, that's what I admire so much about.
But the ripple effect that had
absolutely
on the entire world in generations and thousands of years still speaks today.
That's right. I do think the church has been a little too silent.
Oh, 100% agree.
You agree with that?
Yeah. So how do we navigate our voice through this? Because it isn't going on to me, it's not going on social media and joining the echo chamber of moral outrage and whatever. There's a more constructive way to do that.
I totally agree.
And it's through conversation. It's through eyes eye contact.
Yep.
Because I can just blow off anything on Twitter, and the world hears my thought. But it's just so poisonous.
And what happens to us is we tend to gravitate toward people that are similar anyway, so it becomes an echo chamber.
It does.
It's really not interacting with people that might have a different perspective or need to engage in a conversation where we could show some grace and love and help them understand that the church position, the kingdom position, Jesus' position isn't maybe what they've observed at times, right? You're exactly right.
Because what happens in an echo chamber is you can't understand anything that's being said because everybody's talking and nobody's listening.
That's right. You know, I think one of the things I shared at the end of that sermon a couple weeks ago was we cannot talk or law our way out of prejudice. Like, we keep having conversations, right?
Right. We have a law against murder. It doesn't stop all murders.
That's right. And we can policy this to death. And I'm not saying that some of these policies, and I think there should be a law against murder, right?
Right. I'm not saying there shouldn't be, but at the end of the day, it deals with, we need to be dealing with the heart.
The heart.
Because that's what Jesus was all about.
And so for us who are trying to have our heart right and follow Jesus and also want to be a part of how to create the positive kingdom perspective of no prejudice existing, I think we need to experience our way out of prejudice. And what does that mean? What does that mean? I mean, like, am I intentional about not avoiding someone that doesn't look like me,
right,
or doesn't seem to be in a similar status? Which I hope that I don't have a status. But am I actively moving toward people who don't look like me or don't seem like they're in similar situations?
Again, I'm going back to the life of Christ, and when he wanted people, when people wanted him to take sides and everything, just you think of just this rocking on a boat back and forth. He was the steady.
Yep.
And I think as pastors, as we are called to lead our people spiritually in the world, not of it, I truly believe that we need to be the calm in the storm, that we need to exemplify that, and that just comes with just certain ways that we choose to navigate this
right
for greater impact on the kingdom.
Right. Overreacting, underreacting so many times.
Stay the course.
We need to be reacting in the kingdom way.
Speaking truth in love.
Yeah, that's right. And I challenge you that part of, I think, breaking down the walls that have been constructed by social
silos.
Right.
Yeah.
The fallen world, what we do. Is,
sociology, I mean, they love to put things in categories, right? It's easy to manipulate, and it's easy to, and so now what we have, the media loves that. I mean, it's just really easy to group groups of people of ethnicities or social classes or whatever it is against each other.
I think there's more of that than we even realize. For somebody's gain, for somebody's agenda.
Fall for that.
That's it.
Just
be a kingdom person. Just walk without prejudice. Discern what is going on.
Read 2:11 through 22 for the next week or month. What happens to your thought process?
Yeah. And just like, I do think there's some value to what's being said out there about listening. Find somebody who has dealt with prejudice.
Absolutely.
Befriend them.
Absolutely.
Begin to do life with them. Be intentional and allow your heart to be softened maybe, or to become more aware and perceptive about where these things could exist, because the kingdom is saying, listen, it shouldn't exist.
Yeah, I saw, just to interrupt you quick, a pastor did an interesting illustration where he stood in the middle of the congregation and he held up a big poster and he asked one side of the church what they saw and it was blue, and the other side what they saw and it was orange. It was two different colors. And the point of that was you from this side of the room, you have one perspective. Yeah. From this side of the room, this person has a different perspective. And I think if we can engage each other and talk, with meekness, with humility, with a desire to seek to understand before being understood, and to listen truly. That's where change comes. It doesn't come through yelling.
And to be intentional, like when you see a social construct, whether it's rich, poor, popular or not, or somebody that you just maybe don't identify with as much, and saying, you know what, I'm not going to let those things stay and get in the way of me moving toward this person, and really trying to
that's so good
become friends with them, and hear them and support them and just have a friendship. Like we just need to be more intentional about that, because look at Christ's own groups. Look at who he lived with. It was a wide range of people coming from a lot of different backgrounds.
Well, it was everyone trying to figure out a plan B.
Yep.
Because they weren't Pharisees, they weren't whatever. They'd fallen short of the goals that society had for them.
Yep.
And he said, "Yeah, I choose you. I want you."
Yeah.
And they changed the world.
That's right.
So, final thoughts?
I just again want to go back to this little statement that in the area of prejudice, so often as believers, I truly believe I live among people who are not prejudiced. I've been blessed to see people maturing, growing in Christ and the kingdom. But I think we need to understand that just being able to say, "Hey, I'm not prejudiced," is falling short of the kingdom mission. To bring anti-prejudice into the world and to push back and
be active, not passive.
Yeah, and I'm not saying you to post on social media. Do it in tangible, lasting, real ways. That are personal, interpersonal, and relational. And let's be anti-prejudiced.
Well, hey, thanks for engaging with us in this week's episode of The Weekly Grind as we tackle the topics of today from a biblical perspective. If you found today's topic or any episode valuable to you and your growth, it'd mean a lot to us if you would leave us a comment. And don't forget to subscribe to stay caught up on every episode of the Weekly Grind podcast. Thanks so much, and we will see you next time.